So Dad, we've talked about how important it is to establish your why. And we're going to say, hey, we've gotten to that point. We've established our why. We feel confident in that why. And we've even identified a few folks within our firm who we think could be the ones to take this company to the next generation. And now we're thinking, oh, what do I do next? Where should we start with that?
Yeah, I wonder if I could go backwards for a second and just make a comment, because there may be some folks listening that I want to encourage in this area. I am interested, perhaps even amazed, at the number of small business owners that I meet, one very recently, that have something going. They've got a business going. Maybe they've got some employees, they've got some customers, they've got an impact on their community. But they don't have the most essential legal and financial elements in place. They're in a partnership, in many cases, that's unsupported by any paperwork whatsoever. If you are listening to me right now and you are in that position, find someone. It might be Garry or Lyle, it might be myself or my buddy Brian Black, it might be your attorney, it might be your accountant, that can get you started, because you do not want to be in that situation. Already today, I heard a horror story of the rollout of the lack of putting down your intentions in writing. So go back to your question, where do we start? Well, we just start by understanding what our own intentions are for the future of the business. So we have a why. We want this business, this entity, we believe it has a God-given mission. We want it to go beyond ourselves. So what are my personal intentions and what are my intentions for the entity, and how can I bring them together? Second thing I would say that we really want business owners to understand is you must always honor the entity first. No matter how small your business is, it stands separate from you as the owner of the business, even if you're the 100% owner. See it that way, and you will have a much clearer route to wherever your next step is going to be. So I think, to answer your question more directly, I've really got to start thinking about my intentions. And those intentions may change over time, as mine did. So I started, I'm going to use myself as an example here, started out in a 50-50 partnership with my original partner. And she chose to leave when we were 5 years into business. And we had been 50-50 partners. That worked out fine. We had an agreement as to what would happen, if one of us left, and we played out that agreement. And I think it was fair for the little bit of equity we had going on at the time. And that gave me an opportunity to think about, what are my intentions? What's my exit plan for this? So that's where I started. As I got some good advice from some different people who were ahead of me in business. Said, Roger, you have to have a view of what function you want to have in this business, what the seasons are going to be in the business, and how you're going to exit the business sometime in the future, which at that point would have been 25 years away. And once I got an intention in mind, even if it's an intention that changed over time, it gave me something to work toward to start the transactional parts of the conversation and the relational parts of the conversation.
Well, and I think you make a great point, because you and I probably take for granted a little those foundational elements. Do you have agreements in place? Do you...
Extraordinarily important.
Do you have all the required foundations in place? Because you're definitely going to need them to get to the next step. But back to your honor the entity point, you also need them in case something happens to you.
Exactly.
That's where this whole thing blows up. Even if your intentions are, well, I want this business to go on beyond me, I want it to continue to grow, I want to give opportunities to my people who are next in line. If it's all on you and you don't have clearly documented what happens if something happens to you, we've got a problem. That's where we have to start.
And we see that all too often.
We see it too often. And what I always say when we're having this conversation with clients is, I'm not worried about your spouse. Generally we know the couple, we trust them, spouses trust each other. Or I'm not worried about your business partner. We know these are good people. But where problems usually arise is who is advising that person if you're gone. And if you don't have your intentions clear, like you said, that can be disastrous.
Yeah.
But I do think another strength of having that is it already gets you started when you're having that internal succession conversation.
Exactly.
We had an experience, would have been 4 years ago, where we had 2 minority partners and then myself and Lyle and Charlie. And in honor of the entity, we were looking forward to our succession plan saying, really what would work best for the entity is if we would buy out our 2 minority partners who we don't want to leave the business, but for the best of our succession plan, our plans going forward, we think we need to do that. And we have good personal relationships with them to this day. One of them actually just retired from Masters a few months ago, which was a great celebration. I'm very happy for him. But that was all under the gauze of what's best for the entity is to make kind of a hard decision and put a little bit risk into some relationships that we really highly valued. Thankfully, that was smooth. But the other thing I will say that made that go smoothly, other than the relational capital we already had together, was we have a defined valuation formula and we have defined shareholders agreements. And I can just imagine if we did not have that, it would have been harder to work through all this. We had a benchmark, we had kind of a stake in the ground already that we had all jointly agreed upon. And that gave us a starting point. But something else that brings up that you and I have both been involved with is when we start to talk about these transactions, the buyer and the seller are both working toward the same ends.
Right.
But we can't eliminate the fact that one of them's buying and one of them's selling. What are some of the elements?
You mean as you're bringing an internal successor along and giving them their first opportunity? So you were on the seller end and I was on the buyer end in our respective organizations.
Exactly right.
Thank you.
You were the buyer and you have interests as the buyer. I'm the seller. I have interests as the seller. And in our individual context, those interests are different. Because it needs to work for me on the seller end, it needs to work for you at the buyer end. But we're both going towards the same end goal. What are some of the conversations that you think are helpful to have, given that those conflicts are just inherent to these conversations around internal succession?
Yeah, I have a pretty strong conviction around that, and that is that the seller, who in my case it was a founder, it was me, needs to understand clearly what his or her priorities are. And for me, I decided early on that a healthy transition and a healthy organization beyond my investment and beyond my leadership was the most important thing. And once I decided that, then small sacrifices, concessions, whatever you might think of them as, that might occur on the responsibility side, on the title side, or certainly on the financial side, would be easier to make because there was a higher aspiration that we were moving toward. Secondarily, the seller, not you in your case, but me in my case, I believe needs to declare that intention and then behave in a way that is consistent with that intention. And what that meant on my part was that maximizing my monetary investment, my share value, the value of any particular equity transaction would be subordinate to healthy relationships moving into the future. And remembering that, respecting that, and holding that out as a highly valued principle has been very helpful to me.
So that foundational element of the relational aspect of things for the sake of the relationship and for the business as a whole helps to just lower maybe some of the pressure of the terms of the deal or however we might say that.
Yeah, because it wasn't the most important thing.
Yeah.
And I'm just amazed, Gary. I am amazed at the number of conversations I'm in or even books you read where people in deals are grinding to the end of a few extra dollars when they already have more money than they could ever possibly even spend or conceive of. And
Well,
so I think it's really a values check. Yes, I sure I would like to I've been fortunate to make a reasonable living, a comfortable retirement, whatever those things are. But golly, are they the most important things? Really? Seriously? And so I think if we make our values clear, and we have to do business with ourselves over that, because we know there's going to be other voices. Now, fortunately, those voices were never really close to me.
Yeah.
Because so many of my friends and advisors, financial advisor, my CPA, were not only respectful of what I was declaring as my values, but they were holding me accountable to them. And so every once in a while, when I'd get annoyed at something inside of a transaction, they'd remind me, "Hey, Roger, we're not trying to get you another $1,000.
Right.
We're trying to honor this entity and get it to the next generation in a healthy way." And so I think just understand. On the other hand, there are sales where the maximization of value is extremely important for some reason, or if the founder or the first generation person decides that's their highest priority, let's just deal with it on the face of it. But it will make other things more complicated.
It will. But I think you're hitting on something really important there, which is declare your intentions and your expectations right off the bat. And if I go back to the first buy-in that I did here at Masters with Lyle and Charlie, we kind of had an interesting journey. They talked to me about this opportunity. Of course, I was extremely humbled and excited about it. I talked to a few people about it and came back. We had a follow-up conversation. And in that follow-up conversation, we realized that we had a miscommunication as to some of the ancillary terms of what we were originally talking about. And that made a difference, of course.
Yeah, sure.
And I think one of the key elements that got us through that is we all declared right up front, hey, I declared I'm excited to be part of this business. And I'm not too concerned about the nitty-gritty details of it because I'm excited about the opportunity. I believe in our future.
And you trusted the guys on the other end of the transaction.
And it's all on a foundation of trust. And Lyle and Charlie declared the same thing. Hey, we want you a part of this. We're excited to give you this opportunity. We don't view it as I guess we'll do this for you.
Right.
There was no reluctance in that. And so we were able to work through that rather easily, where if we didn't have the foundation of trust and if we hadn't declared our intentions right off the bat, it could have been very easy for any one of the three of us to get off track, either from ourselves or, like you said, if we didn't have the right advisors around us. I might go talk to somebody, tell them the story, and they would say, wow, they might have a different perspective that is inconsistent with my values.
And that's I wanted to follow up on that point because that's something I was thinking about. I think it's extremely important to choose your outside advisors according to their values alignment. So your accountant, let's say, your insurance and financial advisor, the attorney that's going to write up the agreements, a banker, if that person is involved, other consultants. Certainly we want to hear their point of view, but ultimately we need to choose advisors who, at the very least, are respectful of our priorities and at the very best are aligned with our value system. And when that happens, you have a much better chance. Because we often tell people when they come to us in a succession or transition planning situation and they're already part way into it, if we read or observe the agreements that have been made so far, we can almost always tell the bias of the initial advisor. And it's often not one that is completely in alignment with the person that we're advising. And that's a problem.
Yes, it is.
So I think choosing your advisors carefully, not only in terms of their expertise, which is extremely important because we are talking about, legal and financial arrangements here, but perhaps more importantly, and I'll take the perhaps out, more importantly, that they be aligned with and are prepared to support your priorities and value system within the transaction that you're moving toward.
Yeah, and shockingly, I wholeheartedly agree with that. We may or may not have a little bit of bias here because we've seen this, so we have that perspective, and we're in the business of professional service.
And occasionally, both of us run into clients where we know it's not going to be a match because their intentions for the future aren't ones that we can wholeheartedly support, which doesn't mean they can't have those intentions. I'm not there to tell them they can't have those intentions. I may be there to tell them you'd be well served by somebody else who is not constantly agitating it, that you should be more like me.
Right.
Which I would be tempted to do.
Right, absolutely. And I think another point on that is if in internal business succession, I think it is extremely valuable to have an advisor that is not on one side or the other side.
You should be on the side of the entity.
The side of the entity. And that means if you have one buyer and two sellers, that person's in the room with all three of them, and they're all working together as a team. That dynamic is so much different than buyer coming in.
I've got a lawyer, you've got a lawyer, I've got a financial advisor, you've got a financial advisor. Now we're in the negotiation,
and again, we don't
probably not going to end up where anybody's happy.
No, exactly right. And we don't want to lose sight of the fact, we're not saying that the detailed elements aren't important. They're extremely important, but they're not the thing. The unification.
They're a byproduct of the unification.
Absolutely. Yep. And so that's what I would really encourage is get that conversation started together as soon as it's feasible, as soon as your intentions can be declared. And I think you're going to have a much better chance of keeping the proper things in focus because ultimately you're going to hit a few speed bumps along the way. And you need to be reminded of that unification, that trust.
And you know what I think really helps when you're going through some of the more transactional parts of an internal succession process, the money, the legal agreements, the rights and privileges that may go along with the buyer as he or she moves on, is that you keep your focus on your cohesion elements. Because when we're building the partnership, we're looking to spend time together. Maybe we're inviting the spouses to go out to dinner together and building this cohesion. Sometimes that gets suspended during that period of time, which is just the point in time when it should even show up stronger.
When you need it the most.
When you need it the most. To remind you that these are the people I want to march into the future with.
Yeah, that is so true. And to wrap up this conversation, I'll share a personal compliment. One of the best compliments we've ever received was from our attorney who usually helps us handle these matters. And I called him and said, "Hey, here's kind of what we're going to be doing. We've got agreed upon." He asked me a few questions. Said, "Yep, we've got that all figured out." He said, "You guys are so easy."
Might have saved you a little money too.
It probably saved us some money.
Knowing who your attorney is, it might have saved you a lot of money.
We've got a great one. But what a compliment that was. And that's really our desire is because of the foundation that you've built this on, it's easy. It's not easy, but it's relatively easy. We're not climbing these mountains and running into these huge roadblocks all along the way.
You can remodel the house as often as you want, as long as the foundation is sure.
That is the truth.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Dad.